What's up, Lake Point? Pastor Michael here to fill you in on week 2 of our series, Esther. It's a series that really is about how all of us, every single one of us, was put on this planet for a purpose greater and larger than ourselves. And if we do not pursue the mission that God has for our lives, we will find a substitute, because our lives cannot live in the absence of purpose. And so if we don't embrace our true mission, our lives will become centered around something unworthy, something selfish, something dark, a shadow mission. A shadow mission is an unworthy purpose that produces a shallow life. Pastor Nate picked up the story in chapter 2 of the book of Esther. The king had just kicked Queen Vashti to the curb and was looking for a new wife. And so to find that wife, this is what his advisor suggested. Esther chapter 2 verses 2 to 4 says, "Let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. The king's eunuch in charge of the harem will see that they are all given 12 months of beauty treatments. After that, the young women who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti." Now, keep in mind, there was 127 provinces in the nation of Persia, which means this strange beauty pageant is going to have at least 127 eligible bachelorettes. And in fact, Jewish historian Josephus writes that there was over 400 women selected. Do you know who one of those 400 girls selected was? You guessed it, a young Jewish gal named Esther. We're told that her parents died when she was young, and so her cousin Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. This is the first time we receive a clue as to why this strange and wonderful book might be in the Bible. It's because this little orphan girl and her cousin Mordecai and all their fellow Israelites are living in exile. 100 or so years earlier, they had lost their home in Israel. More than that, though, they had lost their mission to build a strong, flourishing nation so that they could be a light for God in the world. Could this beauty pageant be their opportunity? Now, the text doesn't say why, but in verse 10, we're told that Esther, at the direction of Mordecai, never reveals her nationality or family background to anyone who's associated with the king. So Esther, she goes into the palace and she spends the next 12 months receiving beauty treatments to get herself ready for her debut. Why 12 months? Well, it was so the king's officials could ensure that none of the women that were selected were pregnant before they slept with the king himself. In the end, Esther is selected to be the new queen by King Xerxes, and another crazy party is thrown in her honor. Unfortunately, though, it's not really a fairy tale ending. You see, there's another character in the story, and his name is Haman. And he eventually became the king's right-hand man, his kind of chief of staff, if you will. He was a much stronger leader than Xerxes, but he too had a shadow mission, and his shadow mission was very much rooted in ego and pride. And we see in the story that he becomes enraged because there's this palace official who will not bow down and show Haman the reverence he feels he deserves. And that man's name was Mordecai, Esther's cousin and guardian. Haman, however, does not know that Mordecai is related to Queen Esther, and so he plots his revenge. Haman, he's not satisfied with simply destroying Mordecai. He wants more than that. He wants to destroy all of the Jews. And so he bribes King Xerxes, offering him an enormous sum of money for permission to exterminate the Jewish people. And the king's response is basically like, "I don't care, go for it." And so the king removed his signet ring from his finger and he gave it to Haman, providing him with the authority to issue a decree for the Jewish people to be slaughtered, wiped out. Needless to say, things aren't looking good. We read this in verse 13 of chapter 3, that dispatches were sent by swift messengers into all the provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on one single day. This was scheduled to happen on March 7th of the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. When Mordecai learned of this news, he tore his clothes and put on burlap and ashes and began public mourning at the king's gates. And when Esther hears what her cousin is doing, she sends a messenger to tell him to kind of knock it off. You're making a scene. You see, Esther is not yet aware of Haman's plan. And so Mordecai sends a message back to Esther explaining why he's so upset. And he instructs her to go to the king and to beg for mercy, to plead with him to reverse the edict and to save the Jewish people. However, this is her response. She says, "All the king's officials and even the people in the province know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. The king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. Does Mordecai throw in the towel though? Nope. he begins to actually challenge Esther. He asks Esther a question that is perhaps one of the greatest questions ever asked. He says this, he says, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Basically, in the little speech he gives her, Mordecai implores her not to settle for her shadow mission, not to settle for just being eye candy and a sex object to the king, but rather for her to leverage her influence, to leverage her position, to leverage her voice. He reminds her of a purpose greater and more valuable than her own life. And so, what's Esther's response? She tells Mordecai that she wants 3 days to withdraw with her closest friends for fasting and prayer. She thought being queen was going to be her greatest gift in life, but it had kind of become one of the greatest burdens. For she realized that it was a call to sacrifice, maybe it was even a call to death. She's going to need strength beyond herself for this challenge that she now faced. Esther asked Mordecai to gather all the Jewish people in Susa for 3 days of fasting. And then, with words that are as magnificent in their courage as Mordecai's were in his challenge to her, she declares this in chapter 4, verse 16, when she says, "When the fast is done, I will go to see the king, even though it is against the law, and if I must die, I must die." Absolutely amazing, no? It's incredible. Well, coming out of this part of the story, Pastor Nate asked us to consider 3 questions. First question, what is your shadow mission? Every person has one. The second question is what position or sphere of influence has God given to you? For Esther, her position was being queen, and for most of us, it's a lot more humble than being royalty. Maybe your position or influence is your job, your volunteer role, your family, your life group, your neighborhood. All of us have a sphere of influence. All of us have a network of friends and connections. And so the question is, what is yours, and how does God want you to actually leverage it? The third question is, who plays the role of Mordecai in your life? Who is that person who helps you identify and live out what God is calling you to do? That person who loves you enough to actually challenge you. Everyone needs a Mordecai. Do you have someone who is willing to be honest with you on a regular basis with how you are living your life? Think about it. And better yet, talk about it with your life group and your loved ones. Have fun jumping into the discussion questions. We'll see you next time for part 3 of Esther.